Okay, time's up. All right, so let's start by talking a little bit about the video that was on the screen when most of you were coming into class. Do any of you have any questions or comments about it? Yeah, Sarah.
So Confucianism, is that only, I thought it was just in China, so is it like all over the world then? Because you said it's from Korea.
Yeah, I mean, you'll find Confucians all over the world, particularly any place where the Chinese diaspora or Chinese ideas in general have penetrated to. There's a great deal of cultural traffic historically between China and Japan and Korea. So a lot of ideas travel between these three nations. Confucianism, yes, you're more likely to find traditional Confucian temples today in Korea than you are to find them in China. Does anybody know why? Okay, in the mid-20th century, when the Maoist communists came to power in China, they looked upon the old religious and philosophical systems as tools that the old ruling class had used to oppress them. And so, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism were initially banned and continued for a long time to be officially discouraged. That has changed in recent years as China has become more open again to the rest of the world. And in fact, the Chinese government runs a number of what are called Confucius institutes in a variety of countries that are intended to promote Chinese culture among citizens of those countries. Now, it's actually kind of similar to the way like our State Department used to run reading rooms in other countries that we had diplomatic relations. There was like, a U.S. State Department reading room you could go to and read U.S. newspapers, U.S. magazines, things like that if you were in another country. We don't have those things so much anymore because the baby boomers decided they didn't want to pay for anything. But the Confucius Institutes are sort of similar to that. So they now use Confucius as a kind of international face for Chinese culture, while still officially discouraging the religion within the borders of the country. Well, they have their reasons for discouraging it, and we may not agree with those reasons, but they do know that this is something that's very recognizable outside of China, right? So while they may discourage these traditional philosophies, these traditional religions, in part because they are still kind of a challenge to the values of the ruling regime, it's actually a very canny and smart move to use these well-known figures outside of China who are not associated with the political regime to try to promote Chinese culture. And it's actually, yeah, there's nothing stupid about it. It's actually very clever in a lot of ways.
So they're trying to make it sound like they're a peaceful country? Or,
well, I guess it isn't stupid so much as hypocritical in a way.
Sure it is, yeah. But hypocritical in a very clever kind of way. It's, yeah. Confucius is still a useful figure for promoting these kinds of, for promoting culture and values, even if he is officially still discouraged within his home country. Any other, sorry?
That ritual dance.
Yeah.
They practice it in all the countries that they're promoting it in? Or is it just Korea?
No, you'll only see those kinds of rituals in places where Confucianism is actually practiced. This is it's called the offering of silken wine. And it is a ritual that you will see at Confucian temples, usually at the beginning of autumn. And they celebrate the beginning of the autumn season, the harvest season, by offering up a bolt of silk and some wine to ancestral spirits. That's another thing to grasp about Confucianism, is that there isn't really, this is actually kind of something that a lot of East Asian religions have in common. There isn't really a specific God concept. Much of it is sort of caught up in ancestor worship and folk religion, any sort of supernatural aspect to it. What's really more important is the ritual practice, more so even than who it's directed at, for reasons we'll get to when we talk about the text in more detail. I thought I saw another hand up over here. Yeah, Frank.
Confucianism didn't start out as a religion, did it? It was just a way of life.
No, and I mean, it's in many ways it's still not a religion the way we would define it. This is another thing that is often hard to grasp when talking about East Asian religions. Does anybody know why religions like Christianity and Islam that have gotten very, very far elsewhere in the world have never really made deep inroads in East Asia? If you're a Christian or a Muslim, right, you can only be that thing. You can only identify as a Christian or a Muslim, right? You are essentially tying yourself to that single belief system. The East Asian approach to religion tends to be a little bit more, shall we say, pragmatic, right? People often recognize that different philosophies and different religious systems may have different applications in different parts of their lives. For example, the traditional religion of Japan is called Shinto. S-H-I-N-T-O. And Shinto is essentially just sort of worship of nature spirits, right? You go to these Shinto shrines. If you see in Japan these great big gates that look kind of like this.
That's traditional Shintos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're called torii. And they're traditional, they're the gateways to Shinto shrines. And you...
Don't they also have shrines to Buddha as well?
They do, and I'm getting to that.
Okay.
So you go to the Shinto shrine, and typically you will ask nature spirits for favors to help you while you are still alive, right? It's like, I would really like to get a promotion at work. I ask the nature spirits to help me with this, right? I, tie my little piece of paper with my prayer on it to the bush, and I go. What Shinto doesn't have, though, can you guess what it lacks? If what you're doing primarily is asking for favors from nature spirits in this life.
An afterlife.
Pardon?
An afterlife?
Yes, exactly. There's no afterlife concept. So Shinto doesn't really have anything to say about the next world. So enter Buddhism, right? An import from mainland Asia, which comes in and fills that gap. So most Japanese people who do practice any religion will, go to the Shinto shrine for stuff they want while they're alive, and will still make offerings to the Buddhist monks to pray for their souls after they've died. So people tend to pick and choose amongst elements of different religious systems, much more so than you'll find in the West. Any other questions about the ritual itself? Or the implications of it, or... Yeah, Stephanie.
I know in the past, stories that we've read, it's always been, significant about the male and the female. But the video looked like there were males and females participating in the ritual. Do they all, just do it equally, or do they have certain parts?
Everybody in that ritual has a prescribed role. It's prescribed by their social position, their age, their gender, right? Basically, whatever important classifying characteristic they have, right? That helps to define where they stand, what direction they point to, what they're doing at any given time, right? All of these positions, all of these moves are thoroughly choreographed and have been passed down for centuries in more or less the same fashion, right? Down to the costumes, the music, the intonations of the speaker's voice, right? And what this illustrates is how deeply important proper ritual behavior is in Confucianism. Right, so one of the key terms to understand in Confucian philosophy is li. And li is a word that doesn't translate directly into English. Unfortunately, a lot of the concepts we're going to be dealing with don't translate directly into English. We don't really have an equivalent of these. So, li is sometimes translated as propriety or correct behavior. The closest literal meaning in English is simply ritual. And you may have noticed from your reading of this portion of the Analects, how does Confucius generally seem to feel about ritual? Yep, and it has to be done properly and correctly, right? So by ritual, he's not just talking about religious or political ritual, right? Really, what he's talking about is the entire spectrum of human behavior and human relationships, right?
The order of it?
Pardon?
Is it like the order of it?
Yeah. The order of it is very, very important, right? It is very important that you know your place in society, that you know your place in the ritual. Really, in a way, ritual for him is a kind of metaphor for society at large, right? A large group of people moving together in concert, right? So if the ritual is done properly, if everybody follows his or her assigned part, what happens?
Everything works out like it's supposed to.
Yep, you get harmony, right? Everything works out the way it's supposed to. Harmony is good, right? We like harmony. What happens if somebody